Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of X's and O's. I'm Joe Thompson along with Isak Dinesen. Later on in the show, we're going to be discussing the NBA Playoffs, which have been a little bit more competitive than we originally thought. But first, we're going to discuss the NHL Playoffs that started last Wednesday. There have been a lot of really surprising series that came out of the Eastern Conference, and the Western Conference has been a little bit more competitive. But Isak, I want to get your opinion on the NHL Playoffs so far.
Well, usually the NHL playoffs deliver more on entertainment value in terms of overall than the NBA usually. And I think even though we're going to get to the NBA later in the show and the recent happenings in the first round of that sport, the NHL continues to deliver in terms of just unpredictability and the fact that you can be a team that, kind of barely got in or has no chance to win, and you can still perform at a high level just given the right opportunity. And a lot of these teams in these playoffs have been given the right opportunity, as we'll discuss in this segment.
So I'm going to go ahead and talk about the Eastern Conference because that has the most to talk about. If you watched our show last week, we talked a lot about the Tampa Bay Lightning, the President's Trophy winner, tied the NHL record for wins in a season at
Only
62
wins. And
62 wins.
Were complete trailblazers the entire season.
But unfortunately, they were swept by the Columbus Blue Jackets.
Yep.
In the first round,
They were the best team, I think, in the NHL by about 21 points.
Yeah.
And they just got their doors blown off by a franchise that had never, this is important, they had never won a playoff series in their history. And they're the same age as the Minnesota Wild.
Yeah.
Not once had they won a playoff series and they just beat the Tampa Bay Lightning to a pulp in 4 games.
What do you think happened with the Tampa Bay Lightning in this playoff specifically? They've had issues since making the Stanley Cup Finals in 2015 of getting past the Eastern Conference Finals. What was the difference between losing in the first round this year compared to the previous seasons?
Well, the fact that you have the expectation as the prohibitive favorite by many to win the Stanley Cup, being the best team in the league by such a wide margin that I just said, you have so much expectation now, not only with your previous baggage, but not only from that to perform this season. You have so much expectation to perform this season with all the talent that you have on your roster this year. And it is unbelievably disappointing for that fan base. They have experienced glory in the past with their one Stanley Cup win in 2004, I believe it is.
Yeah, over the Flames.
Just the fact that, this was supposed to be during this era, that version of the franchise that actually goes far and makes it to the Stanley Cup Finals and wins. That was supposed to be this team this year with all the talent they have, but just getting smacked in the mouth by a team that doesn't have a legitimate superstar in the Columbus Blue Jackets. Really, maybe other than their goaltender Sergei Bobrovsky. He's an all-world goaltender that they have. And he's in year out Vezina caliber, one of the top goaltenders in the league, but Columbus it's just unbelievable how they managed to handle that team. All the Lightning's talent, they just took it to them. Really, nothing else to it. After the first period of Game 1.
Going back to your illusion of the Lightning getting smacked in the mouth, you can really go back to the Game 1 when they were up 3-0, and then they allowed 4 unanswered goals to eventually lose Game 1 at home, I believe.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that was really their punch in the mouth, and then they could never recover.
Lost 5-1 in Game 2, also at home, and then Columbus just blew their doors off at Nationwide Arena, one of the which is largely now I think being recognized as a very underrated venue in the NHL. Columbus, that's a college town where Ohio State's there. They brought the energy in those 2 games. It'll be interesting to see how they perform against Boston or Toronto in the second round.
But I think it's really important to note that just because you're the President's Trophy winner does not guarantee you success in the NHL playoffs. I think that's what separates it from the rest of the professional sports playoffs, because you could have a team that goes 16-0 in the NFL, and they're probably going to make it to at least the Super Bowl and quite possibly could win it. You could have a team in the NBA that goes
73-9, for example,
and make it to the NBA Finals. But there have been countless times, San Jose Sharks, Washington Capitals, the list goes on, of President's Trophy winners that have gone on to lose early in the NHL playoffs. So really what it comes down to, the President's Trophy is nice, but it's not a Stanley Cup guarantee. That's the way I look at it. But the other series that I want to talk about in the Eastern Conference, it was the New York Islanders versus the Pittsburgh Penguins, which was another sweep. I think when you went the beginning of the season, Islanders lost John Tavares to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Everyone was predicting that the Islanders would be a bottom feeder in the league, just tanking for a top draft pick. Then they come out of nowhere, make the playoffs, and do really, really well for themselves back in the Nassau Coliseum. And then they go into the playoffs, and they sweep the Pittsburgh Penguins, one of the best teams of this decade and the past 2 decades since they got Sidney Crosby. Take me through that series a little bit.
So, really, I think this series probably initially should have been more Islanders favored anyway. The Islanders were the higher seed, and the Penguins had a lot of overtime losses, which meant that they got into the playoffs. They had a higher seed, at least, in the playoffs over other teams because they took games to overtime and didn't lose in regulation. They had a lot more overtime losses than the Carolina Hurricanes and the Columbus Blue Jackets. If some of those games go the other way and the Penguins lose in regulation, then we might have had a different playoff landscape. But nonetheless, the Penguins, obviously, yes, they have a standard set ever since they had their Stanley Cup run in the mid-2000s, the late 2000s. They have this standard now with this core that's led by Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin. They pretty much need to go deep in the playoffs every year with those two talents so that they can maximize their seasons, given that they have such talent between those two alone, and they continue to build around them. They have great regular seasons. But just the fact that they lose in this situation to the New York Islanders, a team that, as you mentioned, didn't make the playoffs last year and also lost their centerpiece superstar to the Toronto Maple Leafs in free agency. And they're basically just a team that, they also had a new head coach brought in this year, Barry Trotz, who was the head coach of the Stanley Cup champion Washington Capitals. Still sounds weird to me when I say that, but anyway, it was pretty much a new group, or at least it was a group that fell under new leadership this year, and just they really took it to them. Let's try to take a look at some of the results in this series. When you look at the scores of these games, they were pretty competitive, but really, I think watching the games, which I did more often than not, I really like what the Islanders were doing to the Penguins. Their speed that they showed with Matt Barzal and Jordan Eberle leading the way, that was really impressive considering how the Penguins, they were bolstering their defense at the trade deadline, getting guys like Jack Johnson to help on the back line with guys like Chris Letang, who've been around for a long time. But really, Pittsburgh, I think their offense probably failed them the most. Yeah. The Islanders were able to win these 4 games, only scoring 3 and 4 goals, and really the expectation should be when you have an offense that has Phil Kessel, Sidney Crosby, Malkin, and Jake Getsel from Woodbury, Minnesota, which is my hometown. It's just the fact that, you have all this offensive talent and you can't put it together against a roster like this. That isn't the flashiest of rosters even in this conference. Just Pittsburgh not being able to get it done, even win one game in this series, massive disappointment for them.
1 goal in the last 3 games for the Penguins. It's really shocking to see with that offense so elite, as you pointed out. But going through the rest of the
Let's kind of spread this out here. We're going to do some shifting of these papers we have in front of us.
The rest of the bracket in the Eastern Conference, we have the Washington Capitals versus the Carolina Hurricanes. Capitals really established themselves like, hey, last year we won the Stanley Cup, but we're not just settled with winning 1 Stanley Cup. We want another one. And they go and win the first 2 games against the Hurricanes, and then the Hurricanes...
Close games, by the way.
Close games.
Carolina played really well in those games.
And then Carolina, they go to Carolina, and Carolina shuts them out 5-0 in the third game. Take me through that Capitals-Hurricane series and what you think of it so far.
Well, definitely give a ton of credit to the Carolina Hurricanes for even being here, not having been in the playoffs in a decade, and making the necessary adjustments, getting guys like Nino Niederreiter from the Minnesota Wild around trade deadline season, and just making a run that their fan base has been wanting to have for a long time. Yeah. It's been a struggle to get fans to come to games down there in Raleigh.
Even after winning a Stanley Cup a decade ago.
Yep, and just the fact that they're here and they're bringing and they brought the energy in Game 3 back in Raleigh, even though they had a couple really close losses so far in this series, they really brought the energy in Game 3. It was one of the most dominating performances I think I've ever seen in a Stanley Cup playoff game. I told Joe this earlier, and I'm not sure if he's going to really believe me when I tell him again. Carolina, at one point in the third period, led the Capitals in shots on goal 45-10.
It's really insane.
That is an unbelievable array of offense. Carolina was getting just relentless counterattacks, 2-on-1s, odd man rushes, just unbelievable array of offense, and they didn't allow the Capitals to get going at all. It's going to be a very interesting series. It's still 2-1. Anything can happen, but got to be encouraged if you're a Hurricanes fan after that Game 3 win.
Even with a goaltender as talented as Braden Holtby, you can't as a defense, you can't allow 45 shots on goal. That's just not a recipe for success. And then last in the Eastern Conference, we'll go through, give me two teams that have played each other in playoffs before, the Bruins and the Maple Leafs. Another series where Boston is currently leading 2-1.
I've had a soft spot for the Maple Leafs for probably over a decade now. It's been so long since they've won a Stanley Cup, and that fan base deserves it. Getting John Tavares in free agency should help them down the road, and I like the roster that they have right now. Still going to be a matter of whether they can beat a really talented Boston team. They're up 2-1 right now.
Yeah, and then we're going to go ahead and move on to the Western Conference side of the bracket. Top seed in the Western Conference is the Nashville Predators. They're taking on the Dallas Stars. Another 2-1 series lead for the Predators. Take me through those two teams.
Dallas winning in overtime in one of their games. I believe it was Game 2, wherever it is on the papers. But
Nashville won Game 2.
All right, so Dallas won Game 1 in overtime. Not expected, obviously.
Dallas won Game 1.
Yep, or whatever. We'll get it situated, but anyway.
But Dallas did have these papers.
Right, but Dallas did win in overtime for their only win in the series so far. But Nashville's one of my Stanley Cup Finals predictions, so hopefully they don't lose in Game 4 to make this series tied. But otherwise, I still am a firm believer in Nashville's roster over Dallas at this point.
I think by far the most competitive. I feel like Nashville, they definitely have something to prove in this series after making the Stanley Cup Finals in 2017. They had a bit of a disappointing.
They lost to the Winnipeg Jets last year
in the second. It was really disappointing for them last playoff run, and I think they showed that this year they want to get back to the Stanley Cup Finals with their team led by PK Subban. They added at the deadline, as a lot of teams did, as like the Hurricanes, they added
someone from the Minnesota Wild. Yeah, the Wild kind of traded a lot of players.
Yeah, and you could also point out
Boston, speaking of other people,
Boston getting Charlie Coyle. Yep. But I think Nashville, this is probably one of their all-in years. They went all-in years. They bought at the deadline. They're ready to make some noise again. 2017 was nice, but they want the Stanley Cup. So I think adding at the deadline and being up 2-1 against the Dallas Stars is really beneficial for them, and I hope they can take advantage of it and make another run at the Stanley Cup. But moving on to the next series in the bracket, we got the Winnipeg Jets versus the St. Louis Blues. That series is tied up 2-2.
Road teams won every game so far. Now the Jets have home ice advantage again. I really do like what Jordan Binnington's done for the Blues so far in this series, but I think overall, when it comes down to it, Winnipeg's talent's going to be too much for them.
Yeah, and then take me through one of the surprises in the Western Conference, the Calgary Flames versus the Colorado Avalanche. Avalanche is up 2-1 in this series after Calgary won the first game 4-0 in overtime. Not in overtime, just 4-0.
You can't win 4-0 in overtime in hockey, Joe.
It's just words are hard.
They are sometimes.
But just take me through that series. What's been the difference between the way Avalanche has played and Calgary's played?
Well, I think really it comes down to Nathan MacKinnon being the X factor so far for the Colorado Avalanche. He had the game winner in overtime in Game 2, and then really they just ran Calgary completely out of the building in Game 3 on Monday night. Going to be a really big game that's going to be happening tonight at the Pepsi Center in Denver. That's going to be really important for the rest of the series. Colorado, they were the 8th overall seed, I believe, in the Western Conference, and Calgary was the best team in the Western Conference during the regular season. It would be a huge disappointment if Calgary were even to lose tonight, considering they would have to then rally back from down 3-1. But I would think that hopefully Calgary should have more talent. Colorado came into the series a little bit less experienced and a little bit more banged up. We'll see if Calgary turns it on at the end of the series here.
And then the last series before we go to break is the San Jose Sharks versus the Vegas Golden Knights. Vegas is leading this series as well. I think looking at the Vegas Golden Knights, they went to the Stanley Cup Finals last year after people were expecting them to not even be anywhere near the playoffs last year. They won a Cinderella run, made it to the Stanley Cup Finals before losing to the
it wasn't
Capitals
a big
in 5
surprise
games.
It wasn't a big surprise that people doubted them last year, but that was a huge deal for them.
Seeing them back in the playoffs again, I think, and leading in this series as of right now, I think it's really cool to see that their playoff run last year wasn't exactly a fluke, but kind of take me to what your thoughts on this series is.
Mark Stone and Max Pacioretty are the X factor so far. Marc-Andre Fleury has been outstanding so far for the Golden Knights. They should beat the Sharks, even though the Sharks probably have more talent on paper.
Yeah.
I really like what the Golden Knights are doing. I've been a fan of theirs very much since last year, not just because they went to the Stanley Cup Finals, but I really think that they should be probably favorites if they were to move on and take on the winner of that Flames Avalanche series, given that they have that playoff experience from last year on that roster.
It's just going to be a little bit disappointing for the Sharks with yet another playoff failure. You hate to see it for guys like Joe Thornton, Joe Pavelski, Brent Burns. It's just those guys who have been there for years now. Just they have so much talent on that roster, but they just cannot seem to make it very far in the playoffs. Besides their Stanley Cup Finals run in 2016, it's just really disappointing to see.
They really be like that sometimes.
Yeah, but we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to discuss all things NBA playoffs.
The Tlmc offers a variety of services for NDSU students and instructors. Class project support is one of the key ways in which the Tlmc serves faculty. Technology-intensive projects can provide students with an opportunity for creative expression, enhanced communication, and the development of digital media literacy skills that will benefit them in class, college, and beyond. We realize that there are obstacles and challenges to assigning technology-rich projects, and the Tlmc is here to help by serving as a bridge between instructors, students, and the technology. We can help with project planning, identifying student learning and support needs, and developing, coordinating, and delivering project-specific support. Our services include hands-on workshops for your students, scheduled during or outside of class time. Individual and group assistance is always available for students on a walk-in basis at the Tlmc lab. With access to a variety of multimedia software and hardware, students can store and work on their audio-video projects over time. Workstations may be reserved or used on a walk-in basis. Other learning resources include project-specific learning links on the Tlmc website, our learning resource library, and a lynda.com learning kiosk. The Tlmc Media Studio features space and equipment for video recording, studio photography, audio recording, and screen capture. Students, faculty, and staff can make appointments to use the studio and to get help in producing, editing, and publishing their media works. Additional studio resources are also available at Berry Hall. Please contact us if you would like to take a tour of our facilities or visit with us about a project that you have in mind.
Gentlemen, to X's and O's. We're going to go ahead and move on to the other playoff series that happens in the spring into summer, the NBA playoffs. Now, Isaac, we alluded to this earlier at the beginning of the show, but the NBA playoffs have been a little bit more competitive than we were thinking of it when we were talking about it in last week's show. So kind of take me through some of the more competitive playoff series so far.
So really, I think probably the most competitive that's going to end up happening, most of these games are not even most of these series rather are not even 2 games completed yet. But I think the Denver versus San Antonio one is going to be much closer than I think anybody, myself, and maybe yourself included.
I would tend to agree with that.
The Spurs won game 1 out in Denver, where only I think 7 teams had won during the regular, or seven times Denver didn't win at home during the regular season. So San Antonio now taking back home court advantage by winning Game 1 was so big. Denver was able to come back in Game 2. But San Antonio, even though they may not have the stars of old on their team anymore, Parker, Ginobili, and Duncan, they've all been gone
and Kawhi
now.
Leonard.
And Kawhi Leonard even, they traded him, but they still have plenty of playoff experience on that roster. And, I mean, you got LaMarcus Aldridge and DeMar DeRozan, who they just got. He's a playoff veteran, though he hasn't had much success in the playoffs. And also guys coming off the bench like Patty Mills, one of the best players from the 2014 NBA Finals on the San Antonio Spurs. This is still a really good, still a really, really good and viable roster. Denver, they were the surprise team in the NBA this year, but it's going to be really tough, I think, for them to truly prove themselves given what San Antonio has done so far to them through 2 games. Going to be really interesting to see what happens the rest of the series.
Really, the only reason that Denver won Game 2 is that Jamal Murray caught fire for 21 points in the fourth quarter after only having 3 points the entire rest of the previous portion of the game. They really, just that 21-point comeback was just the main reason that they won that game. And then I think another series that is going to be just as competitive has been the Philadelphia 76ers versus the Brooklyn Nets. When you go back to Game 1, Brooklyn really punched Philadelphia in the mouth.
Brooklyn was a huge surprise in Game 1.
But when you look at it, like it's some of the stuff that was happening on the sidelines with Philadelphia players checking their phones, like Joel Embiid specifically looking at Amir Johnson's phone, just not a good look for Philadelphia.
Doris Burke sounded like an angry teacher berating a student during that situation that happened in that first game of the series. But I think Amir Johnson was worried about his daughter's health or something, or whatever the situation. It was a family issue,
which is understandable. But at the same time,
do that in the locker room.
And
I think there's a strict no phones policy on the bench in the NBA.
I think that's just for in professional sports in general. Don't have your phone. Like Pablo Sandoval got in trouble with the Red Sox when he was on the Red Sox for going to the bathroom and checking his phone.
And also Amir Johnson on the Sixers, he wasn't even active for the game. If you're going to be doing that, just do that in the locker room so that you're not subjected to a fine. But that was not a good look. But at least the Sixers rebounded big time last night. I think it was last night in Game 2.
Yeah, and then really took it to Brooklyn. But I hope it's going to be another competitive series. Another series that is tied 1-1 is the Toronto Raptors versus the Orlando Magic. I would really just because the series is tied. I say competitive in a loose sense of the word because. Orlando won that game because the Toronto Raptors just simply didn't play well. Kyle Lowry had 0
Orlando
points.
Played out of their minds in Game 1.
But when you really look at it, Orlando
got
their one.
Had that winning shot in Game 1. Yeah.
Orlando got their one win, which is kind of what they wanted. Nobody wants to get swept in any sort of playoff fashion, but
hey, at least they got back to the playoffs for the first time since the Dwight Howard era.
Yeah. So, but I think Toronto, that Game 1 was a wake-up call, and then they came back. Kawhi had 37 points. Kyle Lowry had 22 and 7 assists.
After Lowry had
0
laid a big fat goose egg in Game 1.
0 of 7 from the floor and 0 for 2 from free throws. So, I don't see this going any further than 5 games, but maybe the Orlando Magic could surprise us.
We'll see.
And then another series that's tied 1-1, which
probably shouldn't be.
Should not be.
Probably shouldn't be tied. It's the Warriors and Clippers series.
Golden State Warriors versus the ace-seeded Los Angeles Clippers. Game 2, the Warriors were up 31 points. But DeMarcus Cousins, he went down with an injury. It
was early in the game.
Early in his injury.
And even still, they had a 31-point lead.
Because they had 4 other All-Stars in their starting lineup that could have should have handled the situation, but then the Clippers came all the way back from down 31 points.
Lou Williams was outstanding off the bench. He's probably the 6th man of the year. He had, I think, 35 or more points in this game. Lou
over 30
Williams
is insane off the bench, and the Clippers came back and won, but I think that's another wake-up call for the Warriors, and I think they'll have no problem handling the Clippers for the rest of the series. And then there's Portland versus OKC. Portland is just proving that so far that Russell Westbrook can't win without Kevin Durant.
On paper, this should be a more competitive series, but really, Oklahoma City, they just keep having these seasons where they just get so hyped up. The last couple years, the first season without Paul George, last season with Paul George, they have these good regular seasons where Russell Westbrook's doing all these great things, averaging triple-doubles. But right now, so far through 2 games in Portland, they've proven that they cannot be a viable, they cannot be reliable really in the playoffs. Russell Westbrook was on his way to a really bad, could have been much worse than his 5 for 20 showing from the field last night.
Yeah.
But Portland's looking really good right now. But
I think that's one of the biggest things you have to look at when you look back on Russell Westbrook's career when it's all done. The averaging triple-doubles and all the triple-double records is right.
It's cool.
But when you look deeper into it, his shooting percentage is just abysmal. He has to shoot like 40 times a game just to get to 20 points. And then his teammates let him get the rebounds, and then he passes when he wants to, and that's how he gets his triple-doubles. They look great. He's going to be a Hall of Famer, but when you look back on it, those shooting percentages are just not as pretty as they should be for a superstar point guard in Russell Westbrook. And then also the fact that he can't make it past the first round since Kevin Durant left for the Golden State Warriors.
It's not happened so far.
It hasn't happened so far.
And not looking like
he's not
so
getting
far,
any younger.
It's not looking like it's going to happen this year.
No. And then the last few series we'll talk about, Houston versus Utah, 4 and 5. Houston, it's a downgrade from last year where they were the number 1 overall seed, but James Harden has literally carried this team to a higher seed than what they were projected to be as the season was winding down. For most of the year when
Chris Paul was hurt, yep.
Yeah. But then Utah, they struggled a little bit out of the gate this season, then they went and fought back for a playoff spot. I feel like they've only played 1 game so far, which Houston won.
Houston blew the doors off of Utah in the first game. I think the second round, which should be Golden State versus Houston, that is probably going to be the de facto Western Conference Finals.
Yeah, pretty much.
Those are the 2 best teams, in my opinion, in the West. Yeah. Those 7 games, if it goes down to 7 games, that should be a really, really, really good series, should it happen that way.
Mm-hmm. But I think Utah could bounce back, maybe win 1 or 2 games against the Rockets. We'll have to see what happens. They have the talent on that roster to win at least a couple of games. I don't think they'll win the series, but Utah is a really talented team. They're going to be talented for a very long time as long as they can keep the core together and keep adding pieces. And then the last series we can talk about is the Boston Celtics versus the Indiana Pacers. Boston, like Houston, a downgrade from the previous season. They've had chemistry issues in and out of the season. They get on hot streaks and then they go cold. Kyrie, it's not really sure what's going to happen to him after this season.
And now at this point for the Celtics as well, losing Marcus Smart, one of their best defenders for quite some time in the playoffs, that's going to really hurt their ability to go deep.
And just the players haven't really meshed as well with Gordon Hayward since he's come back from his injury the previous year, so there's not really enough time for them to gel. But they bounced back. They got a top 4 seed. I think they should handle the Celtics should win this series, I think, because the Pacers don't have Victor Oladipo. He was out just before the All-Star break with a knee injury that sidelined him for the rest of the season. So we'll have to see what happens with the rest of the playoffs. But
and the other series, I think you were just about to allude to this, the Bucks-Pistons 1-8 matchup in the East. It's not a series.
It's just a watch.
Now that Blake Griffin's out for the Pistons.
It's really disappointing to see Blake Griffin injured again. He's got so much talent, but he can't stay healthy. It's just really affecting his career at this point. It's really, like he was one of those superstar players before up until 2014, and then injuries have just plagued him year after year after year. He was an all-star this year. He was healthy during the regular season, but right before the playoffs started, gets hurt again.
Apparently the basketball gods just got to keep picking on Blake Griffin.
I mean, he had such a high, he has experienced the highest of highs, and right now I think he's experienced the lowest of lows. So hats off to Detroit for making the playoffs, but
congratulations.
It's a long way from 2004 and 2005. Well,
whatever.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think overall we'll discuss these series as they advance next week. Yeah. But I think still right now, I don't think we had a chance to talk about NBA Finals predictions, if I'm not mistaken. But,
I don't think so.
But otherwise, I think I'm going to make one right now. Golden State Warriors are coming out of the West. If not, it'll be the Rockets. Since Golden State is kind of a little now that DeMarcus Cousins is going to miss the rest of the playoffs,
they are vulnerable.
They're going to be probably
took them to
vulnerable.
7 games without DeMarcus Cousins last year.
But I think still the Warriors should come out of the West, and I'm going to say the Toronto Raptors come out of the East and not the Milwaukee Bucks. That should be a really good Eastern Conference Finals should the Bucks and Raptors meet. But I think the Bucks and Raptors are going to meet in the Eastern Conference Finals. I think Toronto's deeper than Milwaukee at this point. Milwaukee's a little bit more injured right now.
I would agree that the Bucks are a little bit more injured than the Toronto Raptors, and the Raptors, I think they deserve to make the finals after constantly losing to LeBron James in the second round.
They can't do
and
anymore.
The conference finals, which they can't do because LeBron's not even in the playoffs. Which
tee-hee.
But I just thing with the Bucks that makes me want to have them in the NBA Finals is because how the heck do you guard Giannis Antetokounmpo? The man can dunk from the free throw line and dunk all over your team. He can shoot a three if he really, really wants to. He's not the best. He can make them. 25% from the field. It's not terrible. It's not the best.
He's at least willing to take him.
He's no Steph Curry, but he can shoot a three.
He's at least willing to take him, unlike another young star in this league that plays for Philadelphia, Ben Simmons.
Yeah. And
he's at least willing to take him.
I think just Giannis has been carrying this team for years, and although they have some injuries on their roster right now, I think just him and his talents alone, his defense and the way he plays on offense, he could literally carry this team all the way to the finals. So we'll just have to see what goes on. But that's going to do it for us for this edition of X and O's. For Bison Information Network, I'm Joe Thompson.
And I'm Isaac Dienison.
We'll see you next week.